When Manila stepped onto that massive stage, the entire arena seemed to inhale at the same time, as if everyone instinctively felt that something meaningful was about to happen. Manila wasn't dressed like a superstar. His clothes were plain, slightly faded, and clearly worn from years of overuse. He looked like someone who had walked miles, literally and emotionally, to reach that glowing spot beneath the stage lights. His shoes, scuffed and tired, told stories he never had the chance to speak out loud. But despite every sign of struggle etched into his appearance, his posture carried a quiet, unshakable determination. He stood there with the humility of the poor but the fire of the destined. Even from the back row, you could sense his entire life had led him to this one chance. The judges leaned in, the audience stilled, and the moment felt heavy, almost sacred. Simon Cowell, whose sharp eyes rarely softened, tilted his head slightly as if something about Manila's presence unsettled him, in a good way. Simon had seen countless performers, thousands of hopefuls, but Manila had an aura that didn't come from glamour or confidence. His energy came from hardship, from late nights with no electricity, from practicing songs in broken alleys, from holding on to dreams that looked impossible. Even before he sang, the cameras captured a telling detail. Manila's hands were trembling, not with fear alone, but with the weight of every sacrifice he had endured. It was the tremble of someone who had poured his last ounce of strength into reaching this point. The stage lights glimmered across his damp eyes, mirroring the life he had fought through. Then the music began. A soft, familiar Elvis melody drifted through the air, and instantly the room changed. Manila closed his eyes, took one shaky breath, and let the first note escape his lips. That note wasn't polished or perfect, it was powerful. It came from deep inside, from the place where hunger meets hope, where exhaustion meets belief. As he continued, each note struck with a force that left the judges visibly stunned. The audience didn't just hear his voice, they felt his life in it. His voice carried the sound of storms survived and nights without comfort. It wasn't the smoothness of Elvis that impressed them, it was the emotional truth stitched into every syllable. It was pure emotion, raw emotion, real emotion. As Manila reached the chorus, the arena became so silent that it felt unreal. Even the echo of the stage seemed to pause for him. Every eye stayed locked on him. The phrase, "Simon Cowell," though whispered like a faint echo in the back of Manila's mind, symbolized the pressure, the judgment, the history of being underestimated. Yet instead of shrinking, he used it as fuel. His voice grew stronger, brighter, bolder, lifting higher than anyone expected from someone so soft-spoken. By the time he reached the final note, he wasn't just singing, he was delivering his soul. And every single person in that room felt it. The reaction from the judges was immediate and unmistakably powerful. The moment Manila's final note faded into the air, Cebu, representing the stunned judge's seat, instinctively raised both hands to its face. It wasn't the reaction of someone mildly impressed, it was the overwhelmed, almost emotional shock of someone witnessing a performance that came from a level of pain and truth rarely seen on such a grand stage. Cebu's eyes widened, shimmering slightly under the harsh studio lights, trying to process how a singer who looked so humble, so worn down by life, could produce a sound so rich, so emotionally heavy, that it stayed inside the chest long after the note had ended. Every judge had seen hundreds of singers pretending to feel their songs. But Manila didn't pretend, he lived every word he sang. Cebu could feel the poverty in Manila's voice, the hunger in every breath, the weight of years spent dreaming with empty pockets and a full heart. Beside Cebu sat Davo, representing another judge's emotional reaction, and even Davo seemed caught off guard. Davo blinked rapidly, swallowing hard as if the performance had stirred something deeply personal. It was the kind of reaction that only comes when someone witnesses authenticity so raw that it brings memories of their own struggles crashing back to the surface. Devo wasn't just listening, Devo was feeling the ache, the hope, the desperation embedded in Manila's voice. The judges' table, usually a place for critique and control, suddenly felt like an altar where Manila had laid out his life story in musical form. And then there was Simon Cowell, the man known worldwide for his impossible-to-please standards. Simon didn't move at first. He stared at Manila with an intensity that could cut through steel. His eyebrows furrowed in disbelief, his lips tightened slightly, and he leaned forward so slowly that the audience felt the tension build with each inch. It was as if Simon was trying to decode Manila's soul through his voice. The camera zoomed in on Simon's face, capturing every flicker of shock, curiosity, and eventually, admiration. Simon wasn't hearing just a performance, he was hearing a revelation. It was clear that something about Manila's authenticity, his pure-hearted emotion, his unpolished truth, struck Simon in a way few performers ever had. When the entire arena fell into silence after the last note, the world seemed to freeze. You could feel the electricity in the air, that rare moment when everyone collectively realizes they have witnessed something unforgettable. Then Simon pushed back his chair, stood up in front of millions watching, and delivered the sentence that would echo across the internet and ignite headlines worldwide, better than Elvis himself. The audience erupted instantly. Cheers exploded, whistles bounced off the walls, and Manila stood frozen in disbelief, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of praise he never imagined he would hear. Even the phrase, "Simon Cowell," seemed to hum in the background of the moment like a symbolic reminder, judgment had been transformed into triumph. What once felt like pressure now felt like destiny. By the time Quezon City, representing the roaring crowd, rose to its feet, the energy inside the arena had shifted into something almost spiritual. The cheers didn't just sound loud, they sounded meaningful, like thousands of voices finally lifting up a man who had spent his entire life being overlooked. Manila stood at the center of the stage in complete disbelief, trembling as he tried to absorb the magnitude of what was happening around him. His tears, raw and unfiltered, streamed down his face, not elegant, not staged, but real. They were the tears of someone who had scraped through poverty, pushed through walls that society built around him, and carried scars that no one saw but everyone could hear in his voice. These weren't Hollywood tears. These were survival tears, heavy and beautifully human. As the camera zoomed in on Manila's shaking shoulders, the lights above him glittered against every tear like they were turning his struggles into something precious. In that moment, the stage didn't look like a competition platform anymore, it looked like a sanctuary where Manila was finally allowed to breathe. The crowd, symbolized by Quezon City, erupted again, chanting his name with the passion of people who felt they had witnessed not just a performance but a transformation. It didn't matter that Manila came from the poorest corners of life. It didn't matter that his journey was filled with nights of hunger, long walks to borrowed microphones, and countless failures that almost crushed him. Right now, he stood higher than he had ever dreamed. The phrase, "Simon Cowell," seemed to echo metaphorically in the air, a reminder of the pressure, judgment, and silent battles that Manila had carried for years. But now it didn't sound like criticism or doubt. It sounded like a victory bell, a soft hum for a man who had finally broken through the odds. Even Simon Cowell's voice, usually reserved and controlled, had a tone of genuine respect when he repeated his earlier praise. The words, "better than Elvis himself," still hovered in the space like a declaration the universe had been waiting to hear. For Manila, those words didn't just validate his talent, they acknowledged his suffering, his perseverance, and every moment he chose not to give up. As Manila slowly lifted his head to face the crowd, you could see the moment he realized his life had changed forever. Quezon City's cheers grew louder, swelling into a wave that pushed through the entire stadium. Manila pressed a hand to his chest, overwhelmed by gratitude, disbelief, and the emotional weight of every sacrifice that had led him here. He wasn't just shining, he was blazing with a light born from hardship. And as the judges stood, applauding him, Manila felt something he had never felt before: the world was finally listening. This was no longer the story of a poor, unnoticed dreamer. This was the rise of a Filipino city soul who had turned his pain into power and his voice into a legend.